Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. This show was taped on Monday, so you know better than we do about the results from the 5 primaries. Tomorrow for us, yesterday for you. Connecticut, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Maryland. On the Democratic side, it looks like we probably will end up with fewer delegates out of those 5. We'll probably slip a little bit further behind Hillary Clinton. But here's the thing. Going into the Democratic convention in July, neither candidate is going to have the number of delegates they need, pledged delegates that they need, to win the candidacy outright. Because you need 2,383, I think, is the magic number. And neither candidate's going to have that many pledged delegates. So it will come down to superdelegates. And I'm presuming that they will end up voting for the candidate that has the most pledged delegates. And here's the thing. In advance of actually having the vote, they go through the mechanizations of creating a party platform. And what do you do when you get roughly 45, let's say, % of delegates from the conventions? I mean, from the primaries and from the caucuses. When you get 45% of the delegates, maybe something a little north of that, but about 45%, how do you leverage that into getting the party platform for the election going forward? How do you wedge that and work that to get what you want, or as much of what you can get into the platform? Joe, what are we looking for?
Well, I think what we're looking for is we're looking for the Sanders agenda. Mm-hmm. That's what we really want in the platform.
Okay.
That's what we want the Democratic Party to purport. Mm-hmm. Whether or not they can swallow whether or not the establishment can accept what Bernie Sanders is opting for, that's going to lead to some sort of a struggle. I really think that. Basically, I didn't see Hillary responding positively to the rise on the cap, the Social Security cap, mm-hmm. 250,000. Is that what it is?
Well, I think we were talking about uncapping Social Security.
Yeah, uncapping it, yeah.
So that during the Reagan administration, they capped Social Security, so you only paid your Social Security tax on income up to, I believe, it was about $105,000. Everything beyond that's a free ride. And in exchange for that, what we progressives got was that when people go to collect Social Security, if they have extraordinary income, it reduces their Social Security payments from the Social Security fund. So that was the trade-off. Other than that, I think it's pretty safe to say that during this primary season, candidate Hillary Clinton has adopted a lot of the positions that Bernie Sanders put forth as his agenda and his position, and
well, there's the issue of Glass-Steagall.
Yeah,
I believe Bill mm-hmm. was instrumental in taking Glass-Steagall out of the equation.
He was president, correct? Yeah.
So, in order to put some limit on the kind of activity that's going on in Wall Street and among the banks, Bernie Sanders feels it's necessary to reinstate Glass-Steagall.
Quick reference point: Glass-Steagall was placed in during the Depression because basically what happened in 2008, when the economy fell apart because banks had been generating these mortgage documents and selling them back and forth in order to raise money. They packaged mortgages which were pretty much worthless. They were subprime mortgages. They ended up selling them, in fact, to a lot of pension funds. that bought them because they showed a high rate of return until they were found out for what they are, and then the whole thing collapsed. The Glass-Steagall was put in during the Depression, which kept banks from being involved actively in selling stocks and doing things other than what banks were chartered to do. And when that came into play, it was just a matter of time before the proverbial chickens came home to roost in 2008, and the whole thing fell apart, and taxpayers had to bail out banks on the premise that they were too big to fail.
Well, what happened in effect was when they let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, the cat went berserk. The point I'm trying to make is the banks, the investment companies, the hedge funds, they felt that there was a market in the mortgage industry. They could purchase mortgages, and they could package them, and they can turn them into a desirable commodity. And the thinking was that some of them may not be a strong, favorable investment, but when you package them all together, the ones that were not totally acceptable they would not influence the return. Unfortunately, the demand was such, the activity was such that the commodity was not at all what it was purported to be, and a lot of those mortgages eventually were foreclosed, and then the entire thing collapsed. This could very easily reoccur. There were some regulations put in, but at the present time, I don't know. There may be sufficient to slow things down a bit, but eventually, the same scenario is going to evolve.
Being active in the real estate business, I know from my experience during those years that it was not that people were buying homes that they couldn't afford. What was happening was people were being sold mortgages that were subprime, that were very low interest rates, variable rate mortgages, that there would not have been a problem if prices kept going up. But we know that the real estate, like every other business, is cyclical, that the prices go up, you get to the point where people can't afford to pay additional, and then the prices will flatten out and eventually go down, flatten out, then they'll go back up.
Along with that, the demand for those mortgages by Wall Street was so great that people that ordinarily would not have qualified were given a pass
because they were sold mortgages that were low interest rates, which allowed them to buy a little bit bigger home than they could have bought otherwise. And the premise from the broker was, and these are people that could have gotten fixed rate loans and could have bought houses, a little bit more modest homes, but they could have bought homes. The premise that they were sold by mortgage brokers was that take this lower interest rate loan, you'll have a savings every year. They're short term, they're going to go up, don't worry about it. Well, no matter what happens, don't worry about it, because you'll just come back to me and we'll refinance it and everything will be fine.
Well, you just said it, refinance it. Periodically they felt they'd have the option of refinancing because the equity in the property would be constantly going up.
Absolutely. That was the premise, that prices would continue to go up and it would be no problem coming back and refinancing your mortgage.
And a lot of the young operators in the market at the time had never really experienced a severe downturn in the market, and so they couldn't even conceive of them ever going down. I mean, like how high up could they possibly go?
It had only been 20 years since it happened, but people's memories are very short. I've seen two recessions now, back in 1988 and then again in 2008, when prices flattened out and then dropped. And it happens. It's going to happen again in 20 years.
It's cyclical.
Yeah.
It's part of the part of the way it goes.
It's always a buyer's market. Buyers always push prices up or don't push prices up according to their ability to purchase, according to their generosity based on their ability to purchase. Well, so this is gonna happen again.
You know what's interesting too is when it did happen, and then there were these bailouts.
2028, mark your calendar.
Well, back to 2000. Well, no, this is recently. Back in when did they bailed them out around 2009 or so?
Yep,
right?
in 2008 the market collapsed.
That's when it collapsed. Well, this is interesting. When General Motors was bailed out, it seemed as though the Hillary camp felt that they had this as an advantage. This is something that they can promote in the campaign, but it did kind of backfire on them because the bailout money didn't go to the workers.
Nope.
You know, they didn't really benefit that much by it. It just kept the industry floating until it could rebound somewhat, and then, of course, pay back the loan, which I believe it did. Is that correct?
Yeah.
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 So, in any case, all this, all these kinds of machinations that take place within the economy do not benefit the public, the working man. If anything, his job he can lose his job for one, or he can become obsolete, or his job can be outsourced. There are a lot of ways. There are a lot of ways in the society, built into the society right now, which there are a lot of obstacles stacked against the American worker. And what Bernie Sanders is trying to do is to kind of get a grip on this. There's been a reallocation of wealth. This is not what capitalism is supposed to be about in its purest sense, according to some of the purists. But that's what happened. Yeah. All that money sort of shifted in a certain direction, and it decimated the middle class. And you got to swing it back the other way.
Ronald Reagan talked about trickle-down economics, and his opponent in 1980, George H.W. Bush, called it voodoo economics because, and we've seen this over and over again, that trickle-down economics doesn't exist. What happens is you have trickle-up economics where the wealthiest glom onto the income of people further down the pay scale, and they suck up. They take their money rather than taking the money that they earn, these multi-million-dollar salaries. That money does not trickle down to middle America.
Well, the understanding is that it would trickle down because there's a need for workers. Mm-hmm. There's a need for the products to be developed, generated, so to speak. But once that money gets into the hands of the power structure, they will try to figure out ways to limit how much of that filters out of their hands, whether it be through outsourcing, whether it be through robotics, whether it be through utilizing the technology that will eliminate workers. They're constantly attempting to find ways to prevent that dollar from filtering down, and so much so that it doesn't filter down as some suspect that it does.
And yet, ironically, people that produce wealth and produce products need to have a strong middle-income family worker. You need to have them because those are presumably the people that are going to use their money that they earn to buy the products, and in some cases buy the products that they actually end up making. So, good example is Henry Ford, who was no friend of the working man, but he did understand that his employees needed to earn enough money in their jobs so that they could buy a Ford. And that was key to the rise of Ford Motor Company.
There's also another factor, though. what happens in effect is once a particular product is developed, okay, eventually it's going to saturate the market, and therefore what those profits now that have been gained, they have to be used to purchase related industries or related products or related innovations that now they can create a demand for from the markets. So, that's another reason why they're going to hold on to that dollar and not let it filter down, because they may need that to pick up related industries. So it's always a struggle to get that dollar to come down to the workers, and then the excuse of, well, we're in a global economy. That's the way it is,
and perhaps that's the problem.
That may very well be the problem. Now, I don't think it was such a bad idea creating these trade agreements. And what's happened in the past is we've primed industries in a lot of other countries. And there's a really good amount of trade that goes on between the United States and between China and South Korea and Vietnam and a number of places throughout the world. But now that we've primed them, what we have to do is we have to start moving in the other direction. Right now, before they start to exploit us, perhaps these trade agreements have to be structured so that they're fair. I mean, Donald Trump and
that's the differentiation,
and Bernie Sanders, they're looking at this stuff. They know, both of them know, and they can honestly express their views and their opinions because they're not that tied into the establishment. It's the establishment that wants to preserve the status quo.
Well, I'm going to be a little bit cynical on that point and say that Bernie Sanders is the one that's been talking about these issues for a long time, and Donald Trump, who's been everywhere on every single issue. 30 seconds? Oh, 10 minutes, okay. Donald Trump, who's been everywhere on every single issue, saw that Bernie Sanders had that issue resonating, that people were very intrigued and they saw that this is what was happening, and Donald Trump said, well, there's an issue I can glom onto and adopt and make some hay because everybody seems to be of a mind about that. So he found that issue through Bernie Sanders and then took it as his own, adopted it for his own. And I really don't think that he, like all the other issues that he's changed his thoughts on over and over again through the decades, I don't trust that he believes that. The same way that I don't trust that Hillary Clinton, who's changed her beliefs, changed her strategy, changed her policy positions to match Bernie Sanders on all these issues.
Yeah, you're talking about a certain kind of pragmatic mentality without any real course, without any... Now, Bernie's ideas, through the years have tested well.
Yeah.
And he doesn't necessarily feel that he has to go the way the wind blows in order to maintain a strong presence in the public's mind.
He's been tested. He's been consistent, and there's no question where he stands on any issue. It's the other candidates, and I'm speaking specifically to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. They blow with the wind.
Right, and they want to maintain the status quo strongly because, number one, it doesn't threaten the market activity. Mm-hmm. It makes Wall Street feel very comfortable. All right, they don't want to feel that any kind of rug might be pulled out from under them. All right, if someone like Hillary is elected, they're quite happy. I mean, I think even the Koch brothers would be happy if Hillary were elected, simply because they're certainly not going to put any of their money on any of the Republican candidates. If they can put enough money into the Congress and create the kind of obstructionism that they did for Obama, they can do the same thing for Hillary until it's time to find someone more viable that they can back, that's going to get into a position of power and maintain what they believe should be the political agenda.
See, it's interesting that you would say that because Charles Koch came out and said that exact thing.
You can
over the
see
weekend.
it in baseball. Right now, the Mets have a really strong team. I mean, they've got the pitching. The hitting has to wake up. The Yankees, right now, they're stars. They've gotten older. All right, they can't contribute the way they have in the past. All right, the Yankees right now are holding on to their money until the market shifts, and they can go after some of these stars when free agency opens up and it's favorable to them.
They've been paying a luxury tax for a long time. And benefiting from them by benefiting from the luxury tax by buying expensive players and winning pretty consistently. Like you say, now that's come to an end for a while, and they've stopped spending huge amounts of money. The team hasn't suffered as much as it might have, but it is fairly weak this year.
It is this week, and this is not their year. And of course, the fans are going to feel a little disappointed. But as far as management goes, as well. That's okay for this year. We've got our eyes set on it. It's not cost effective for us to be spending that kind of money now. It's not out there for us. So it's interesting how those that have the money and the power, they pretty much know how to use it, how to manipulate the system in whatever way necessary, in order to see to it that their ends become the reality.
Yeah, you mentioned the Koch brothers, and Charles Koch over the weekend said that he certainly may prefer Hillary Clinton over either Ted Cruz or Donald Trump. That they were, and these wealthy people, they donate their money, they spread their money around. They go principally with one party, but they make sure that they donate some money to the other party, so that they could say, see, well, we donated money to you, we helped get you elected. Now where's ours? Where's ours?
I would think
where's our payback?
It only makes sense for them to spread the money around, maybe put a little bit more into the pockets of the favored ones, the ones that seem to have an edge, because you don't want to waste any of your money. But it's the way it's done, and and once we get to a brokered convention, I'll bet there's going to be a lot of money and perks and little things going on.
On the Republican side.
On the Republican side,
and I don't think it's going to happen. No, I think Trump's got a strong enough lead and getting enough delegates tomorrow, or from your perspective, audience, from your perspective, yesterday, that he's on track now to get his 1,280 something
or whatever it is
delegates to win on the first round.
It's conceivable that he could do that. However, it's also conceivable that since the Republican National Committee does not see him as their favorite son, so to speak.
Now he's going to take them down if he's the candidate. That's fairly.
They'd like to avoid
belief.
that. Perhaps maybe they can feed him some kind of a carrot that may induce him to back out. That's going to be tough.
With a man these people are built on ego. Ego is an important thing to them, and I don't think that you could give any amount of anything to anyone as wealthy as he is, in order to get him to back off the ego trip that he's on. He's having a blast. He's loving it. He's not really, I don't think, concerned about what happens the day after the election, or should he win the day after being sworn in.
Well, if he is sidetracked, in line with your analysis of his personality, the ego, etc., do you conceive the possibility of him simply withdrawing from the Republican Party and running as an independent against the candidate that the party may feel they need to put out?
If they push him aside.
If they push him aside, he may do that. Will that then give Bernie Sanders an option to also break with the Democratic Party and run as an independent?
You've talked about that, and that would certainly be an interesting race to have 4 candidates, and how that would shake out in the electoral vote. That's a good question. How it would shake out with the popular vote? You'd probably have 2 candidates on the Democratic side, a Democratic insider and a Democratic socialist, Bernie Sanders.
Well, Democratic outsider.
That are fairly consistent in their popularity. If you had, I think it'd be safe to say that if you had independents able to run and to vote, independents able to vote in all the Democratic Party primaries and caucuses like they have not, you would see that Bernie Sanders would be closer to Hillary Clinton in amount of support.
Well, in the general election,
Yeah.
those independents are going to be voting for Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, and those 125,000 people that were cut from the Democratic voting registration in Brooklyn.
Right.
Those 125,000 people.
They're back
They're back with and let's face it, the reason why they cut most of those 125,000 out is because they have the ability to do that if you haven't voted in 2 cycles. These are folks that hadn't voted in 8 years and because they weren't really that excited enough about a candidate. These folks were back in voting in the Democratic Party, or trying to vote in the Democratic Party primary in New York State, because their candidate, Bernie Sanders, was running. So the calculation on the part of the insiders to make these cuts of everybody that hadn't voted in 2 cycles.
Once we get rid of the Bernie Sanders vote.
Exactly. I think I think that could be the case could be made for that. I don't think the case could be made against it. We're going to come back and do another show. We're going to talk about a lot of similar things. I want to focus on Hillary Clinton's claim that the money from stock traders and
Wall Street,
that money
the pharmaceutical industries,
and that money does not necessarily affect her decision making. And I think she gave the answer to that question in her answer to that question during one of the debates between herself and Bernie Sanders. That's been Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow.